Hi there, assessment students. It's Dr. Ryder, and this is an EDL 553 sidebar, bringing rhyme and reason to your assessment design. I hope that you'll take some time to view this particular video, try to get from it what you may as you prepare to pivot from the first part of your plan that you're submitting this evening, I guess, on Friday. And we move into the pieces of the plan that begin to put the design into place that you will eventually execute in your final project. So, if you will revisit with me our comparison from the first night of class of assessment and research, we can see these items circled here in the middle that both get at the purposes of both assessments on the left and research on the right. So, there are some things that we identified in class that were certainly similar about assessment and research and the ways in which they work and the sorts of activities that are involved in each. But there are definitely some distinct differences in this one or here about what it's used for. And essentially its purpose, or the purposes of these two things, is pretty important to keep in mind. And so we know that the purpose for research, whether it's in education, whether it's in mathematics or physics or applied sciences and engineering, it's to investigate or provide evidence toward a theory or a hypothesis that we have about given a certain set of conditions and our understanding of how they might work, plus our knowledge and application of theory, what we would expect to observe within the data when we engage our sort of research or our sort of experimental work. If we think about research in higher education student affairs work in particular, we can think about the role of theory and how we might utilize research both to develop theory as well as to test theories or to test hypotheses that, the ideas that we might have, the things that we might expect to see given a particular theory in a certain set of conditions. And so the model that you see here on your screen is a diagram of Schlossberg's transitions theory, where, as you can see, you've got the student who's transitioning, kind of coming into the environment, right there in the middle, with the transition event kind of pressing, in from the left. And as a result of that, sort of experience, there's this sort of process of navigating that transition that Schlossberg theorizes with the 4 S's of self-support, strategies, and situation as they interact with the environment, the coping resources that may be available, or the ones that may be assets or liabilities, and the transition characteristics. You might also be familiar with, from student development theory in particular, or some other programs or experiences that you've had yourself, with Aston's theory of student involvement, as it provides several different postulates. Looks like there are 1 through 5 here, where describing what involvement is. So involvement is an investment of psychosocial and physical energy. Involvement is a continuous concept that varies from student to student. So involvement is going to look different from one person to the next. Involvement can be quantitative in terms of how much time is devoted, qualitative in terms of one's level of seriousness, emphasis, priority given to an activity, and then goes on to talk about how involvement is correlated or related to learning and other aspects of development that occur within the higher education setting. And then lastly, this is a diagram that represents Holland's vocational choice theory. And so with each of these, we can see how research has been utilized to develop these sorts of theoretical perspectives or sets of previously tested ideas Or so, for example, in the case of Holland's vocational choice theory, it provides these 6 different sorts of categories or career domains that Holland has identified and kind of described in terms of the specific characteristics that people going into them might have, the sorts of abilities, talents, skills that are drawn upon with each of these. But all of this occurs because of research that investigates, these sort of ideas of, vocationalism, of, job seeking, personal fulfillment, in the previous slide, aspects of student engagement, and then what students who are significantly engaged in activities, whether it's number or in time or intensity and kind of level of personal investment. We know from research that's been done to test these sorts of theories what we would expect to find, and we can apply these theories to understand how students are participating in the world on campus, what's going on with them in terms of how they engage with and interact with others and with the university or the college experience, and we can also test these theories in action with specific programs that we might put in place to achieve some of these outcomes that the theories suggest. And so that's part of doing research as well, and in a more sort of action research sense perhaps. But it's also something that we can do within an assessment context. We can look at some of these different theories, student involvement, vocational choice perhaps, others as well, to understand how our students are engaging, or whether or not something that we're providing as a way to become engaged or become involved is the word that Aston used. If those are the sorts of things that are contributing to students' involvement, if we are providing the right opportunities, if involvement is our outcome, that students will be drawn to and will want to become engaged in, so that they can produce some of these higher level or higher ordered outcomes around academic performance and learning described in postulates 4 and 5. So we know that assessment has, and evaluation, to acknowledge that, has a slightly different purpose, where our goal is to help professionals make better decisions for students, such as improving programs or how we might deploy specific resources. And the process looks a little bit different, but not entirely. Sometimes our standards for evidence are going to be a little bit different. But it's not so much about hypothesis testing, which in research requires certain levels of statistical significance, which requires significantly larger data sets than we may have sometimes in some assessment research or evaluation research. But because we're not really doing hypothesis testing, we're trying to see maybe how things are going so we can improve decisions that we might make or improve quality of service and how we deploy or activate resources. There's some different sorts of things at stake here in the assessment area. It doesn't mean that we are completely devoid of any sort of guidance if we think about theory guiding research or research design, because in assessments or evaluation, we use these sorts of approaches sometimes as a stand-in for theory. So if we understand that a program or an experience is designed to promote student involvement in specific activities on campus, whether it's out of the classroom or in class activities, we can either look at that as part of a research project, maybe across several different institutions, like a consortium of institutions, say, in our athletic conference, and this actually happens at UNCW with other CAA schools, might research a set of common experiences to see what the specific outcomes are as they relate to a given theory. In a more assessment context, we might look at that sort of process as well, as it's informed by theory, but we might position the sort of theoretical outcomes as things that might be related to the program itself, or these other approaches here, and use it in the same sort of way as a model to predict what's happening or what we expect to happen as we go about doing the work of assessment and evaluation. Think of approaches and the ones that are provided for you on Canvas as frameworks, essentially. And these frameworks are an integrated set of options used to do some or all of the tasks involved in evaluation. Now, this little infographic or meme or whatever you want to call it here, damn you, IKEA, you're sometimes like this. It's essentially, we can think of frameworks as, this set of instructions, tools, resources that we need that help us to understand or scope out what's involved in the evaluation process. Perhaps the most common one is that is the objectives-oriented framework within program-oriented evaluation. And we've seen this scary sort of logic model before. And we know here that while there's all this stuff going on within this diagram, we can actually keep it fairly simple, utilizing and applying a program-oriented or this objectives-oriented framework and structuring our evaluation or our assessment. We focus on the objectives or outcomes from a single event or a series of events or the overall program, whatever it is, and whether the combination of inputs and outputs achieves the outcomes that are intended or that are desired. Some approaches or frameworks are intended to help identify gaps or breakdowns contributing to suboptimal performance in terms of meeting those sorts of outcomes or those objectives. And by using the logic model approach here, we can maybe more easily identify where things like available resources or support for specific activities or money, personnel, might undermine the achievement of our anticipated objectives. Decision-oriented approaches, such as the SIP model or framework, can be utilized particularly to help managers, funders, and other folks in positions to make the call to add or create a program, tweak an existing program, and keep it going, or significantly overhaul or scrap a program. And this can be done to make their decisions based on data from assessment or evaluating data across these sorts of domains here. And so the SIP model accounts for context, input, process, and product, or CIPP, and takes into consideration all of these things at once. If we're looking at participant-oriented models, most of you will think that you have a participant-oriented evaluation, or this would be an appropriate choice for you. And I'm going to tell you here and now that it probably is not, because these approaches very specifically place the participants, whether it's students or other staff members who are downstream from the people who make the decisions, at the very center. And it's an active process of identifying the specific concerns or needs that participants may have, very clearly and intentionally taking those concerns to the leaders of the activity and reporting them and discussing those with leaders. And then any sort of issues that aren't resolved through that process, they become the focus for additional data collection. And they also kind of become the sorts of things that you kind of like set off to the side and say, okay, we made this sort of progress. This is what's left, or these are the sorts of conditions that still remain. And then once that's done, there's a process of sharing and debriefing results with each participant. And while all of you will have participants in your work, the design or the intent is not the same. So this is an example of where the intent and what's desired can be really, really important. And when I say what's desired as a result of and how the data will be used with an assessment project can be very important too. Well, what kind of approach or model might be applied here? So some pro tips. Each approach or framework may be complemented by theory. So we can add theory in to any of these sorts of things we've already looked at in terms of the evaluation or the assessment approaches to augment or supplement them. It doesn't mean that you can do one or the other. You have to choose one or the other, though you have that choice here within this project. The approaches or the models offer guidelines, are not absolutes, so we tweak them, we change them, we don't just maybe use like one little bit, but it's not uncommon to pull some pieces out and use some and use the others that are left behind. Keep in mind that the cleanest, which might be the simplest approach, is likely the best. Lastly, The assessment object